My name is Rachel, and I used to love old apartments. They had character, charm, history, but I'll never rent one again. It started the first night after I moved in. The place was perfect. High ceilings, antique fixtures, and a price so low. It felt like a steal. The landlord mentioned it had been vacant for years, but I didn't ask why. I should have. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. A whisper, faint, almost distant, like someone speaking through a wall. At first I thought it was a neighbor. The building was old. Maybe the walls were thin. But when I pressed my ear against the wall, the voices weren't coming from next door. They were coming from the vent. The next night, it got worse. The whispers grew clearer, urgent, overlapping. They were speaking, but I couldn't understand the words. It was like a dozen voices trapped in a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Then, I made a mistake. I spoke back. Hello. Silence. 4. The first time, the voices stopped. The apartment felt impossibly still, the air thick with something I couldn't name. My pulse hammered as I backed away from the vent, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. Then, the whisper returned, closer, right behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The whispering had stopped, but the feeling of being watched remained. I barely slept that night. By the next evening, I had convinced myself it was my imagination. The stress of moving, the creaks of an old building, I was overreacting, so I decided to prove it to myself. I grabbed a flashlight, unscrewed the vent cover, and peered inside. There was something in there, a shape small, crumpled, barely visible in the darkness. I reached in, my fingers grazing something smooth and cold. Then, it moved. A breath not mine rushed against my hand. I screamed, jerking back, dropping the flashlight. It clattered to the floor, rolling toward the door. I didn't stop to pick it up. I ran. I spent the night at a friend's place, returning in the morning when the daylight felt safe. But something was wrong. The vent was sealed shut, not just closed, bolted, as if it had never been touched. My flashlight was gone, too. And when I asked my landlord about the apartment's history, his face went pale. No one has lived in that unit for 20 years, he said. Not since the last tenant disappeared. That night, I packed my things and left. I don't know what was in the vent, and I never want to find out. My name is Lucas, and I never believed in haunted objects. So I brought the chair into my house. It was an antique, heavy oak, with intricate carvings on the arms and legs. I found it at an estate sale, sitting alone in the corner of a dimly lit room. The moment I saw it, I felt an odd pull toward it, like it was meant for me. The seller practically gave it away, muttering something about not wanting it in the house anymore. I ignored the warning. I shouldn't have. The first night, I placed the chair in my living room, directly across from the couch. I admired how it looked old, elegant. But when I woke up the next morning, it had moved. It was no longer facing the couch. It was facing my bedroom door. I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe I had bumped into it. Maybe I was remembering wrong. But the next night, it moved again. Each morning, the chair was in a different place. Sometimes it was near the window, sometimes turned toward a corner, but always closer to my room. I tried convincing myself it was nothing, but a cold unease settled in my chest. Then, one night, I heard it, a soft creak. I opened my eyes, my bedroom, dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside. I lay there, barely breathing, ears straining against the silence. Another creak. Closer this time. I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight. My stomach dropped. The chair was in my doorway, and there was someone sitting in it, a shadowy figure, tall and thin, its form barely distinguishable in the dim light. Its head tilted slightly, as if watching me. My breath hitched. my entire body frozen in terror. Then it stood up. I didn't wait to see more. I lunged for the door, slamming it shut and locking it. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stayed like that until the first rays of dawn trickled through the window. When I finally gathered the courage to open the door, the chair was back in the living room, empty that morning. I dragged it outside and left it on the curb. When I came home later, it was gone. I should have felt relief. But that night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it again, a soft creak closer. My name is Daniel, and until last month, I thought I knew every inch of my house. I had lived here for years, memorized every creaky floorboard, every stubborn window latch. But then, I found the room. It started when I was cleaning out the attic, sorting through forgotten boxes and dust-covered furniture. I noticed something odd. The house's exterior dimensions didn't match what I knew of the interior. There was space unaccounted for, a whole section of the house that shouldn't exist. I went searching. After hours of tapping on walls and measuring spaces, I found it. A door I had never noticed before. It was in the upstairs hallway, nestled between my bedroom and the bathroom. I stared at it, confused. How had I never seen it before? The knob was ice cold as I turned it. The room beyond was ... wrong. It was small, featureless, with bare walls and a single window. But something about it sent a chill through my spine. The air was heavy, thick, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside, and then I blinked. The room changed. The window was gone. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. I turned around, expecting to see the open door, but it had vanished. I was staring at 4 solid walls. Panic clawed at my throat. My breaths came in short gasps. I pressed my hands against the wall where the door had been, pushing, pounding, nothing. It was as if the door had never been there. Then, the whispering started. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. A low, rustling murmur, like dozens of voices speaking at once. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was clear. They were angry. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. The room was shrinking. I was sure of it now. The ceiling felt lower. The walls were closer. The whispering turned into frantic, overlapping voices, then silence, and the door was back. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward, stumbling out into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. My lungs burned as I gasped for air. My house felt normal again. The sounds of the outside world returned, birds chirping, cars passing in the distance. I turned back to the door. It was gone, not just locked, not just closed. Gone. The wall where it had been was now seamless, as if it had never existed. I ran my hands over the space where the frame should have been, but there was nothing, just smooth drywall. But at night, I still hear the whispering, and I know the room is still there, waiting. My name is Olivia, and I've always had an odd fascination with antique mirrors. There's something captivating about them, the way they hold the reflections of people long gone. But after what happened last month, I refused to have one in my home ever again. It started when I found the mirror at an estate sale. It was a beautiful, ornate piece with a gilded frame, the glass slightly warped with age. The seller mentioned it had belonged to a family that mysteriously disappeared decades ago. But I brushed it off as a way to make the sale more intriguing. I hung it in my bedroom the first few nights. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, I started to notice small things. When I walked past, I swore my reflection lingered just a second too long. Other times, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, like my reflection was shifting slightly, even when I was perfectly still. Then, one night, I woke up to a noise, a faint tapping sound. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, my eyes landing on the mirror. My breath caught in my throat. My reflection was awake. I was still lying in bed, frozen in terror, but my reflection was standing, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, a twisted grin stretching across its face, and then it raised a hand and tapped on the glass again. I bolted upright, my breath ragged. My reflection mirrored the motion but a second too late. Like it had to catch up. Shaking, I grabbed the mirror off the wall and shoved it face down onto the floor. But the tapping didn't stop. It was coming from inside the glass. Panicked, I ran to the garage, grabbed the heaviest hammer I could find, and swung it down with all my strength. The glass shattered, pieces flying across the room. I expected relief. I expected silence. But the tapping continued. The shards on the floor were still reflecting me. Every broken piece showed my face watching, grinning, moving on their own. Then, the whispers started. I fled the house that night, refusing to go back until morning. When I returned, the shards were gone. The frame was empty, clean, as if the mirror had never been there. But at night, I still hear it, soft tapping, waiting for me to look again. My name is Eric, and I should have listened to my instincts. There are some doors that should never be opened. It started when I moved into my grandmother's old house. She had passed away months before, leaving the place abandoned. It was a beautiful yet eerie Victorian home, filled with old furniture and memories of a past I barely knew. But there was one thing that unsettled me from the beginning: a door at the end of the upstairs hallway. Unlike the rest of the house, this door was bolted shut with heavy locks. It looked out of place, as if it had been sealed for a reason. I asked my mother about it, but she only grew pale and muttered something about keeping things undisturbed. I should have left it alone, but I didn't. One night, curiosity got the best of me. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy. I stood in front of the locked door, feeling the wood beneath my fingertips. Something about it felt wrong, like it was colder than the rest of the house. I found an old set of keys in my grandmother's desk. My hands trembled as I tried them, one after another. When I finally heard the click, a cold draft seeped from the widening crack of the door, and then I smelled it rot, stagnant, wet decay, like something had been sealed away for far too long. I pushed the door open, my flashlight casting weak beams into the darkness. The room beyond was small, empty except for a single chair in the center, and on it, something sat, a figure. It was facing away from me, its shape barely human. Bones stretched against thin gray skin, long limbs dangling over the edges of the chair. Its head twitched slightly, as if sensing my presence. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to get out. Then it turned. Its eyes were hollow, dark pits that pulled in the light. Its mouth, wide and unnatural, curled into something that resembled a grin, and then it stood up. I slammed the door shut and stumbled backward. The locks I needed to relock them. My shaking hands fumbled with the keys, heart hammering against my ribs. Just as I slid the final bolt into place, the door shuddered violently. The sound of nails scratching against wood filled the hallway, and then, silence. I stood there, breathless, waiting. Minutes passed, then hours. The house remained still. By the time dawn's light seeped through the windows, I convinced myself that whatever I had seen was gone. But that night, I heard it. A whisper. You opened the door. Now, every night, I wake up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow, heavy, stopping right outside my bedroom door, and I know one day, the locks won't be enough.